Let's move on now to China and China's latest provocations specifically around Arunachal Pradesh. 1 month ago, India's foreign minister met his Chinese counterpart in Delhi. 5 months from now, India will play host to China's President Xi Jinping for the G20 summit. Amid all of this diplomatic engagement, which to be fair is fairly downgraded from what it was just a few years ago, Beijing has decided to needle New Delhi again. After Ladakh, China's new focus appears to be the Indian state of Arunachal Pradesh, which shields the rest of the northeast from Beijing. So what is the latest provocation that China is throwing at India? And how have Delhi and the other world powers reacted? What China is doing essentially is, it says, we're going to be renaming areas in Arunachal Pradesh. Remember, Arunachal Pradesh is an Indian state, an integral part of India. The Minister for Law comes from Arunachal Pradesh. There's no really doubt about who's in possession out there. And now China is coming out and saying, we're going to rename parts of this. So clearly it's a provocation, and it's not crystal clear as to why China is doing this. And I'm going to be discussing that question with Professor Harsh Pant a short while from now. But before I do that, let's take you through the latest developments when it comes to China's provocations in Arunachal Pradesh.
After nearly 3 years of keeping Ladakh burning, China seems to be trying to ignite the tinderbox in Arunachal Pradesh. For the third time since 2017, Beijing announced new names for 11 places in the northeast state on the 2nd of April. This diplomatic offensive came around 4 months after military aggression in Arunachal's Tawang area when Chinese soldiers tried to enter Indian territory. They were repelled by Indian troops after a bloody scuffle. Now the Modi government and the Jinping administration are engaged in a war of words over China's latest stunt. While Delhi said that announcing invented names won't change the reality on the ground, Beijing called this its sovereign right as Arunachal is Chinese territory. With tensions rising in the region once again, let's take a look at the history of the dispute over the northeast state. The 1914 Simla Pact demarcated the boundary between British India and Tibet. The McMahon Line divided areas along undefined borders in the region. However, the Chinese representative did not consent to the Simla Convention. China reportedly claims 90,000 square kilometers of Arunachal, or the entire state. Beijing cites Tibet and Tawang's historical Buddhist ties as proof of its claim. China refers to Arunachal as Zhangnan and South Tibet. But why is China so interested in Arunachal? There are 5 major reasons according to experts. The first is that Arunachal is the closest site for India to launch missile attacks on key Chinese cities. Another military factor is that the state is a prime location for India to station air defense systems against the PLA. Also, Arunachal's Tawang is a gateway to the northeast, being a critical stop on the Tibet-Brahmaputra Valley corridor. Apart from strategic reasons, China fears that the close people-to-people ties between the residents of Tibet and Arunachal can fuel rebellions in Tibet. Additionally, if China controls Arunachal, it would make it easier for Beijing to dominate Bhutan. With all these factors in mind, China reacts vehemently whenever Indian and Tibetan leaders visit Arunachal. One manner of retaliation is the renaming spree, which first occurred soon after the Dalai Lama visited the state in 2017. It is a way of keeping the border dispute simmering and keeping China's illegal claim on Arunachal in the headlines. In 1960, India and China agreed to work on resolving the extensive border dispute. But more than 60 years later, that goal seems more unattainable than ever, with Beijing opening one front after another. So what comes next? India is already dealing with military aggression and diplomatic offensives. Now Beijing can up the ante by engaging in water warfare with Delhi, experts believe. Being upriver, China can control the flow of river water to India's northeast. Beijing has constructed several dams on the Yalung-Sangpo River, which is called Siang and Brahmaputra in India. Harnessing these, China can cause both droughts and floods in the northeast, warn observers. This appears to be the next challenge which Delhi must prepare for while fending off China's constant guerrilla line attacks.
And to try and understand what exactly it is that the Chinese are up to, it's a great pleasure to be joined by Professor Harsh Pant, Vice President, Studies and Foreign Affairs at the Observer Research Foundation, King's University, and a number of other places as well. Thank you so much for joining us, Professor Pant. What exactly is it that the Chinese hope to achieve by renaming places in Arunachal Pradesh, other than needling India, annoying India, and ensuring that India is going to remain an adversary for quite some time to come?
Well, it seems like a pincer kind of a movement that you keep the pressure boiling on the border, and at the same time you create new realities, new facts on the ground, so that even when you are negotiating from a position of strength, right? They will come to so tomorrow when the boundary negotiations restart, they will come to the negotiating table with all their legalese. And they would say that, look, this is what we have been saying all along, and we have been gradually making a case to you and to wider international community and to public that we have never renounced any of these claims. So they are, I think, in some ways using what is called lawfare. That they have changed the realities on the ground. They have come up with the new border law, which came into effect last January, and gradually by renaming names, by renaming places in Arunachal, I think they are establishing their credentials as the dominant party in these negotiations. So I think India will have to be well prepared, both to fight them out at the border as well as a very strong legal defense that will eventually happen whenever you have diplomatic negotiations.
You know, Professor Pant, it's one thing for the Chinese to do this in the South China Sea, as they often do, find an unoccupied rock and put an airstrip in that and say, guess what, this is Chinese territory. But in the case of Arunachal Pradesh, it's somewhat different. I mean, India has been in possession of Arunachal Pradesh all along. Our law ministers from Arunachal Pradesh, people in Arunachal Pradesh vote in elections. There's absolutely no doubt as to who is in possession of the state of Arunachal Pradesh. So changing the names of some territories over there is not going to create any doubt in anybody's mind anywhere in the world, including in China, as to who's in possession of Arunachal Pradesh and the fact that it's an integral part of India.
Yes, but I think, Vikram, Chinese also never really gave up on keeping the pressure on India, right? So every time you would have a prime ministerial visit, or every time you will have Dalai Lama visiting there, they would come out with an official statement, and that's their strategy, right? They don't give up on their even smallest of claims, hoping that some of these claims could be used at the negotiating table. So they are, in that sense, they have a peculiar way of negotiating, and they have a peculiar way of keeping the pressure on. So even when they were, we had relatively better ties with them. You would recall that off and on Arunachal would come up, you as a reporter or you would report it, that they are saying, they have come up with a statement that, look, Arunachal, South Tibet belongs to China, and this is India is occupying it. So they have consistently from their position made this statement. Of course, as you point out, it's a reality as to who is in control, and a lot of this would depend on how far are they willing to go militarily on the border. But as they are demonstrating, just last December we had Tawang engagements with the soldiers on both sides. Again, both the pressures are on from militarily, diplomatically, as well as I think through the legal mechanisms which they keep on perpetuating.
But having said that about the Chinese thinking long terms, I'm not sure whether the Chinese are thinking through the full implications of all of this. We've already seen the United States coming out very strongly in India's defense on this issue and saying very clearly Arunachal Pradesh is part of India. Now, there may be a lot of irritants, a lot of irritation that keeps happening between the West and between India. But in many ways, would you feel that this is also a wake-up call to India to keep on realizing and to keep the eye fixed on who the real enemy is, who the real threat is? Because I guess a lot of analysts and experts would feel that the only real enemy, the only person with whom you can get into a shooting war who matters is China. And to that extent, India's foreign policy may have to be calibrated accordingly.
Absolutely. I think, there is no doubt that you have, in foreign policy, there is a longer game and there is a shorter game, right? In the short to medium term, you may, for example, want a certain kind of distance from the West. or to create some space between you and the West for certain kinds of issues where you don't get along. But I think increasingly, when we are looking at the big picture, you are coming to the conclusion that that big picture is being looked at through similar prisms by the West, and in particular by the US and by India. And there is no denying that. We have seen in terms of our operational capabilities, enhancing those capabilities. We have seen that in terms of what we are doing militarily with certain countries, what we are doing with on critical and emerging technology. So I think if you look at the big picture, you see that China is emerging as a challenge. And a challenge of a kind that India is not in a position to unilaterally respond to. And that is also becoming clear. And, sometimes there is a complaint that why is India not taking a more robust position? And the argument is pretty simple, that, look, we are a decade, if not more, behind China in terms of our capabilities. And when you don't have internal capabilities, external partnerships become a mechanism of leveraging your engagements to your national interest. And I think that's what perhaps will have to be done much more robustly.
All right, Professor Pant, I think you make some really important points out there. Thank you so much for joining us. And look, my take on this entire matter is to say I think what Professor Pant has just said is something that we need to keep in mind. There's often a tendency here in India to react rather vociferously to whatever may happen in the West, and West will say something, make some statements we don't like, there will be irritants. But at the end of the day, the big threat, the big enemy is China, and it's going to remain China for a long period of time.